I've been a night shift hospital housekeeper for 11 years, and I can tell you that most people don't see you when you're pushing a mop cart at 2 in the morning. They look right through you. That used to bother me. It doesn't anymore, because the one person who did see me ended up saving my life. My name is Eunice. I'm 63 years old, and I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. My husband passed 6 years ago, a stroke, sudden, no warning, and after the funeral and the casseroles and the sympathy cards, everyone went back to their lives. I went back to mine, which, at that point, was mostly just showing up. I started the housekeeping job at Mercy Regional about 8 months after I lost him, not because I needed the money urgently, though the extra income didn't hurt. I needed somewhere to be. I needed a reason to put on shoes. The night shift suited me because the hospital was quieter then, and I didn't have to make conversation with anyone who might ask how I was doing and actually mean it. The parking structure where I left my car after every shift was a 6-story concrete thing across the street from the hospital's east entrance. On nights when I got off at 3 in the morning, the walk from the building to the elevator on level 2 felt longer than it probably was. The fluorescent lights on the second floor had been flickering for months. I'd put in a maintenance request twice. Nothing happened. That's where I first noticed the parking attendant in the booth near the ground floor exit. His name was Jerome. Jerome had been working that booth for, I later learned, almost 4 years. He was a quiet man, maybe 50, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and reading glasses that he wore pushed up on his forehead even when he wasn't reading anything. He always had a thermos of coffee and a paperback novel, and every time I walked past his booth at the end of my shift, he'd look up and nod. That was it, just a nod. One night in February, one of those Ohio nights where the cold doesn't just chill you, it discourages you from existing. I was running later than usual because a patient on the 3rd floor had been sick in the corridor, and it had taken me and another colleague almost an hour to sort it all out. By the time I reached the parking structure, it was nearly 4 in the morning, and Jerome was the only other person I could see in the whole building. I don't know exactly why I stopped that night. I think I was just tired in a way that goes past the body. I stopped at his booth and I said, "You ever get used to the quiet out here?" He considered that seriously, the way some people do when they actually listen to a question. Then he said, "I stopped fighting it a while back. Now I kind of like it." I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in I don't know how long. After that, I stopped to say a few words whenever our shifts aligned. In March, I started bringing him food. Nothing elaborate. I make a big pot of something on Sunday, split it into containers, and bring one to him on Monday and Wednesday nights. Red beans and rice. Chicken and dumplings. Sometimes just a good thick vegetable soup. He'd take the container with both hands, the way people do when they're genuinely grateful, and he'd say, "Miss Eunice, you didn't have to do this." I always told him the truth. I made too much. It'll just go to waste. That was partly true. The other part was that it gave me something to look forward to on those long, flat shifts. Something small to plan for. By April, we had what I would call a quiet friendship. Not the kind where you know everything about each other. The kind where you know enough and the rest is comfortable. I knew he had a son he didn't talk to. He mentioned it once and then closed that door politely. I knew he had a sister in Kentucky who called every Sunday. I knew he preferred the Elmore Leonard novels to anything with a lot of description in it. He knew I'd been a widow for 6 years. He knew I had a daughter, Camille, who lived in Phoenix with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, and that I missed them more than I knew how to say out loud. He never pried. I appreciated that more than I could explain. In late April, something started feeling off. It began with a small thing, the way bad things usually do. I noticed a car, a dark blue sedan, older model, a little rust on the rear wheel wells, parked on level 2 of the structure. It was there when I arrived for my shift at 7 in the evening. It was still there when I left at 3 in the morning. The second night I saw it, I told myself it was probably someone who worked a long shift like mine and just rode with a colleague. The third night, I started to pay more attention. The car was always in the same spot, or close to it, and once, only once, I thought I saw the interior light blink off just as I turned the corner on my way to my own car. Like someone had been in it and switched off a phone screen. I didn't say anything to anyone. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was a 63-year-old woman who watched too many true crime shows on Sunday afternoons. I was projecting, but I changed which elevator I used. Started taking the stairwell on the west side of the structure instead of the east. I didn't even make the decision consciously. My body just started doing it. One Tuesday night in early May, I came down at 3:10 and passed Jerome's booth. He looked up, and instead of nodding, he said, "Can I ask you something?" I stopped. He put his paperback down on the counter, spine up. He said, "How long have you been driving that gray Honda Civic?" I told him 6 years. "Since before my husband passed." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "There's a man who comes into this structure on the nights you work. He doesn't park here. He pays the flat rate, walks up to level 2, stays maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and leaves. He's done it at least 6 times in the last 3 weeks. I've been watching him because it struck me as strange." He paused. "Last night I watched him on the camera. He walked to the area near your car and stood there for a while. Just stood. I heard what he said, but it took a moment to arrange itself into something real inside my head." Jerome kept his voice steady. "I could be wrong about what this means, but I'd feel worse saying nothing than saying something and being wrong." I asked him what the man looked like. He described him: medium height, heavy set, wearing a dark jacket most nights, a ball cap pulled low, maybe late 40s. And then Jerome said, "He drives a blue sedan, older, parks it out on the street." My hands had gone cold. Jerome said, "I don't think you should go up to your car alone tonight." He walked with me. All the way up to level 2, past the flickering light, to my car. We didn't see anyone. The blue sedan was not on the street when I drove out. I went home and sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up, and I was certain enough of the daylight to feel safe going to bed. The next morning I called my daughter. Camille is like her father in the best ways. She doesn't panic, she thinks. She talked me through everything I'd noticed over the past several weeks, asked careful questions, and by the end of the call she said, "Mom, you need to tell your building manager, and you need to file a police report even if they don't do much with it. You need a record." I did both of those things. The officer at the non-emergency line was polite but non-committal. He took down the information about the blue sedan, said they'd look into it, gave me a case number. My building manager sent a maintenance request to add a camera to the second floor of the parking structure. It would take a few weeks. That Friday night, I came down for my shift at 2:45. Jerome wasn't in his booth. There was a laminated sign that said, "Attendant on break. Back in 15 min." I stood there for a moment. My car was on level 2. I could wait. I could call someone. I called Camille, but she didn't pick up. It was midnight in Phoenix, and she had young children. I decided to take the west stairwell and be quick about it. I got to level 2 and turned toward my car, and I heard footsteps behind me. Not quick footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones, like someone who wasn't in a hurry because they didn't need to be. I did not turn around. I walked faster. My keys were already in my hand because I'd learned to do that. Hold your keys in your hand before you get out of the elevator. The remote unlock beeped, and my car lights flashed, and I got in and hit the lock button, and my hands were shaking so hard I missed the ignition twice. When I finally got the car started, I sat there for a moment. In my rearview mirror, I could see the shape of a man standing near the stairwell door. Just standing, watching my car. I drove down to Jerome's booth, and he was back. I pulled up alongside the booth and rolled down my window and told him what had happened, and I was speaking faster than I normally do, and he told me to stay in my car with the locks on while he called the parking structure's security line. 2 security officers came within about 8 minutes. By the time they did, the man was gone. But Jerome had caught something I hadn't. Before I'd arrived at the booth, he'd seen the man walk out through the pedestrian exit on the north side of the structure. And Jerome, who had been watching this person for weeks by then, had noted his license plate. The police took it more seriously when we had a plate number. It turned out the man had no legal reason to be watching me specifically. He had a history, another woman in another part of the city, a restraining order filed 2 years prior that had since expired. The detective who called me the following week told me that what we documented, along with Jerome's records of the dates and times and the security camera footage, was enough to open a formal investigation. I won't say everything was resolved cleanly and quickly because that isn't how these things work in real life. There were months of uncertainty, a court date that got postponed, a period where I switched to day shift, which my supervisor arranged without any fuss once I explained. But eventually there was a restraining order, and eventually there was a conviction on stalking charges, and eventually I could walk to my car in the dark without my hands shaking. Through all of it, Jerome was a quiet, steady presence. He retired from the parking structure in September. His knees, he said, were making the overnight hours harder than they used to be. On his last night, I brought him a full meal, roasted chicken, macaroni and cheese made from scratch, and a sweet potato pie that had taken me most of Sunday afternoon. We ate together in the break room, and he showed me pictures of his son on his phone. They'd started talking again, tentatively, over the summer. The boy, who was in his mid-20s, had reached out after some difficulty in his own life, and Jerome had answered. He said, "I didn't know if he would call, but I kept thinking, if he does, I want to pick up." I thought about my husband, how he always picked up. Jerome said something to me that night that I keep coming back to. He said, "You brought me food for 4 months before any of this happened. You did it because you had extra," you said. "But I think you did it because that's who you are. And that's why I watched out for you. Not because I expected anything. Just because some people deserve to be looked after. I'm not sure I deserved it any more than anyone else. But I've thought a lot about what he said and about what those months taught me. I used to think that kindness was something you did for other people, a service you provided. I brought Jerome food because I had extra, yes, but also because somewhere in the numb grief of those post-Wido years I needed to still feel like someone who did things for others, like someone who still participated in the small ceremonies of care that hold daily life together. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have predicted, was that those small ceremonies were building something. Not a transaction, not an obligation, just a relationship, a quiet, unspectacular one, the kind you forget to value until it saves your life. I transferred back to night shift in January, once the court process was settled and I felt safe again. The new attendant in Jerome's booth is a young woman named Patricia. No, wait, I should say, a young woman I'll call by a nickname her coworkers use, Pip. She's in her mid-20s, working nights to put herself through nursing school. On my 3rd week back, I brought her a container of black bean soup and a piece of cornbread. She looked at me the way Jerome had looked at me that first time, with both hands and genuine surprise, and said, "You didn't have to do this." I told her the truth. "I made too much. It'll go to waste." She laughed, and the sound of it bounced off the concrete ceiling of the booth, and I walked up to my car feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time before Jerome, something that took me a while to name. Safe. I felt safe. Not because there was no danger in the world. There is always danger. But because I remembered that I was not invisible, and I was not alone, and that the quiet choice to be kind, without keeping score, without expecting return, has a way of weaving you into a net of people who will, when it matters most, catch you. Kindness is not weakness. Don't let anyone tell you it is. It is, if you practice it honestly and with your eyes open, one of the strongest things you can be. I think about Jerome a lot, now that he's gone from that booth and I'm back on night shift with Pip across the street. I think about the fact that he watched me walk past his window for weeks before I ever stopped to say a word to him. And I think about how different everything might have looked if I had just kept walking. There's something I've come to understand about the way life actually works. Not in the dramatic lightning bolt way that movies like to show you, but in the slow, accumulated way that reality operates. What you put out, you build. Every small act of decency you extend to another person is a brick. You don't see the structure going up. You're just placing bricks, one at a time, on nights when you're exhausted and your feet hurt, and you can't remember the last time anyone asked how you were doing. But the structure goes up anyway. Jerome didn't watch out for me because he owed me anything. He watched out for me because I had shown him over 4 months of Tuesday and Wednesday nights that I was the kind of person who noticed other people. And somewhere in that noticing, a quiet trust had formed. That trust is what made him speak up on a night when staying quiet would have been so much easier. I thought about what kind of person it takes to do what he did, to observe something troubling over weeks, to track it carefully rather than dismiss it, and then to say something to a woman he barely knew at 3 a.m. about a situation that had nothing to do with him. That takes a quality I can only call moral seriousness, a sense that the right thing is worth some inconvenience, that other people's safety is, in fact, your business at least a little bit if you happen to be positioned to help. And it takes more than goodwill to do that. It takes attention. Jerome was a reader of people and of situations. He'd been quietly watching that parking structure for years, and he trained himself to notice what was normal and what wasn't. That kind of clear-eyed observation, the habit of actually looking and then thinking carefully about what you see, is something I didn't value enough before all of this. I thought of it as just a personality type, something some people have and others don't. Now I think it's a discipline. You practice it or you don't. Jerome practiced it. And then there was what it took on my end. After he told me what he'd seen, I had a choice about what to do with that information. I could have minimized it, told myself I was overreacting, that it was probably nothing, that I didn't want to make a fuss. Part of me wanted to do exactly that, but I called my daughter. I filed the report. I changed my shift temporarily. I stayed with the process through the postponed court dates and the long, uncertain months when nothing felt resolved. That required a kind of stubbornness that doesn't feel heroic while you're doing it. It just feels like getting up and doing the next necessary thing, even when you're tired of doing necessary things. What I want to say to anyone who is listening, who is maybe in one of those tired, flat stretches where life has stopped feeling like it adds up to much, is this: the choices you make in ordinary moments are not small. The choice to bring someone a meal, the choice to stop and actually speak, the choice to pay attention to what's happening around you rather than just moving through the world on autopilot. These choices accumulate into something real, even when you can't see it. I am 63 years old, and I push a mop cart for a living, and a man with a thermos of coffee and a paperback novel watched over me when I needed it most, because I once stopped and asked him a question about the quiet. That is enough. That is more than enough.